Good news. Okay, so I'm going to start with a little quote here. I'm going to bring it up. Can. And this quote is from someone named Dharma Vidya David Brazier. And it says, imperfect, limited, and vulnerable as I am, the sun still shines upon me. Things do work out. Food appears. Rain falls. Wonderful conversations take place. And the grass grows without any help from me. And I actually don't know what he means by the second part of that. Although all those things are true, right? The rain and I was just talking about the rain. Right? I don't need to participate in that. It comes. But I'm more interested in that first part where he talks about being imperfect and vulnerable. I think there was another adjective that I didn't retain. And to me, that brings up such an essential point. I think sometimes we can have the misunderstanding that the goal of spirituality is perfection. That somehow through our spiritual practice, we're going to cease to be fallible human beings who make mistakes, who inadvertently hurt others. And we're going to acquire some type of perfection. And I think that's absolutely is a misconception. It is false. Spirituality does not eliminate our imperfections. It does not make us gods. No matter how long we practice, no matter how much we sit, no matter how many retreats we do, etc., we will always be human beings. And in fact, if anything, spirituality should bring us closer to that humanity. That messy, fallible, sometimes crazy, always chaotic humanity. And what spirituality does is helps us to come to embrace more of the totality of our own being, including our humanity. And by the way, including our darkness. That's another common sort of spiritual delusion. Oh, I'm a Buddhist. I am all light and love. I have no darkness. I have no hatred. Right? That's the delusion. By virtue of being human, there is darkness in us. But often through spirituality, we try to mask that. And I've heard people say they never get angry. Never get angry. Well, I, for one, cannot make that claim. And I'm inclined to believe that everyone gets angry at one time or another, that the Dalai Lama himself acknowledges that he has times when he gets angry. It's not his anger is not an ego-based, self-wounding kind of anger, but a more compassionate anger at the suffering and mistreatment of other beings. But that said, there's still anger there. Anger is part of the human condition. It's an emotion that we all experience from time to time. And our spirituality, our spiritual practice does not take that away. Now, it does transform it. It does transform. I should say it transforms our relationship to it. When we are completely enmeshed with our ego, then we are completely identified with our thoughts and feelings. And through practice, one of the things that we come to see is that my thoughts and feelings are not me. They are not my essential nature. They are not my Buddha nature, right? And by the way, that is pristine, the Buddha nature, right? It's the other side of our human nature, that encompasses our faults, our delusions, our failings, if we want to call them that. Our Buddha nature is always pristine. It's always pure. And yet those two things are so completely interwoven, right? They're completely interwoven. Identity of the relative and the absolute. We are always human. We are always fallible. And we are always Buddhas. It's a hard juxtaposition to wrap ourselves around, but this is what we're talking about here. Right? We will never cease to be humans, any more than we can cease to have Buddha nature. I won't say be Buddhist, but to have Buddha nature. Those must always coexist. So what is this? Why are we practicing? Well, I'm going to be. If I was an asshole when I started, I'm going to be an asshole when I'm done, and waste all this time on the cushions. I could be an asshole without without zazen. I mean, because as the hold that our ego has on our being becomes, I like to say, it becomes more translucent. Again, as we see more that our thoughts and feelings do not have to determine whom we are or how we act in this world, we gain tremendous power. You know, I can be angry, and then the next moment I can see that anger, and I can let that anger go, right? That's what we learn in Zazen. The fundamental thing that we learn in Zazen is letting go. I don't have to allow my further thoughts and actions be determined by a moment of anger. I have power over how I behave in the world. I have the opportunity to respond with compassion, with loving kindness. I heard a wonderful piece on NPR yesterday. I don't know if any others of you caught it. And I did not get this woman's name, but she was a parishioner of C.T. Vivian. Did anybody else hear her speak yesterday? Well, if folks don't know, C.T. Vivian was a very important civil rights leader, close friend of Martin Luther King. And really, he was a minister, and really a wonderful, wonderful man. And she had been, I guess, a parishioner of Vivian's, had been with him through the civil rights era. And at some point, became involved in the teaching of anti-racism. And what she explained was that her original attitude had been, if white people hate me, I'm just going to hate them back. If they're not nice to me, I don't see any reason that I have to be nice to them. But at some point, she sort of had an epiphany that that wasn't the way, that she needed to respond to with people that in a way that we would say is compassion and loving kindness. She needed to acknowledge them. She needed to not put them down, not make them feel guilty or shamed, that she had to join with people in sort of an elevated place. And that when she did that, extraordinary things happened. And she described a few things that she had done. One was just simply she was speaking to a group of the quintessential old angry white men, the sort of the Fox News crowd. But she was coming from this place of, I don't know if the word is acceptance, but of acknowledgement, of recognition, of not putting them down, and using that as the platform that she then began to talk about racism. And their response was essentially, thank you. This is what we want. This is what we need. So it allowed them to embrace her message, because her message was coming from this place of acknowledgement, of loving kindness, of compassion. This is so lacking today in how we speak with one another and how we dialogue. Look at the awful stuff that's being spoken on all sides. Not just on the right, but on the left and everywhere in between. Mean, angry speech, mean, angry thought. And she was showing us the way out, just as the Buddha has shown us the way out. We have, we need to be in the world with compassion and loving kindness. I know I say that a lot, but it keeps coming back in many forms. So here we are, these imperfect beings. How do we do that? It's not easy, is it? Sometimes it's really not easy. One of the things that I believe, and this might be just true about me, certainly haven't done it, that it's very hard to have been raised in this culture as a white person and not have been infected by some degree of racism. And if we look at the media, all the stereotypes of Black and brown people as gangsters, as hitmen, as rioters, and so on and so forth, it's hard, I believe, not to have at some level of our consciousness been affected by those images, by those stereotypes. And so even if we don't have sort of classic racist beliefs about racial inferiority, the stuff that the Klan people believe, we may still believe, oh yeah, but Black people are dangerous, they're violent, they're, and that, and we see it playing out every day in this culture. So my inclination is to think that we're all, if we're white, we're all infected to some degree. We may not be racist, we may not see ourselves as racist, but to some degree, we've been contaminated because the culture is racist. And it's inescapable. Right? So what do we do with that? We have to start with, we have to be aware of it. We have to acknowledge it. If I have a thought or a feeling that arises that dehumanizes people of color in some way, the first thing I have to do is acknowledge it. Right? I cannot make any progress by pretending it's not there. if I pretend it's not there, it just goes away and then it surfaces again and again and again. I've got to meet it. I've got to acknowledge it. I'm back to this vulnerable, fallible human being. I have to say, I am a vulnerable, fallible human being. I have some ideas and beliefs that are not okay, that I need to work with. Now, at the same time, I want to give myself the same courtesy that that woman gave to the audiences that she speaks with. I don't want to shame and blame myself. I'm not a bad human being because I have those thoughts, ideas. But I have an opportunity to be a better human being. I can take those out and look at them and then let them go. Out of the awareness comes the opportunity. It's stuffing them back in is very different from letting them go. Right? And I may need to do that many, many times. And maybe for the rest of my life. And that's okay. But again, it comes out of this place of, I am an imperfect, vulnerable, sometimes foolish, often crazy human being. That's not going to change. No matter how much sitting I do, no matter how many books on Zen I read, those are the facts of the reality of our being. So in a sense, we always have a wonderful opportunity to do better, to be better, to use the Dharma as a tool in our lives. As a tool in our lives to help work with that aspect of me that's less than wonderful at times. To work with that aspect of me that's human. And that will always be human. There's a wonderful book I haven't talked about in a long time, but some of you may know, called The Spirituality of Imperfection. And it's kind of an AA flavored book, but it's not an AA book per se. But it's wonderful. It draws out of a number of spiritual traditions, Zen being one of them, Hasidic Judaism, the Desert Fathers, Sufi, and so on, to show how all of these traditions speak about this, speak about our humanity, our imperfection, and how that is the ground of our spiritual life. Right? Not in some shaming sense of original sin or, but in a sense of just humanity. Humanity. It's such an important project that we all can work with. We can do better. We can be better in the sense of transforming our negative emotions into compassion and loving kindness. And it's an endless project, again, can't speak for everybody, but speaking for myself, I have some buttons that are ancient, that when those buttons get pushed, and I don't know that will ever cease in my life. So that's something I have to work with and be aware of. They're not as sensitive maybe as they were once. My reactions are not what they were once, but they're still there. They're still present. That's this project we're embarked on. So that's this wonderful thing about Zen, right? It gives us this opportunity. It's like, it's AA gives people in recovery an opportunity to do better, to be better, to to grow and transform and heal. And in a sense, Zen does the same for us, right? It gives us that transformative opportunity, that opportunity to grow and heal and do better and be better. And by the way, we're never getting close to perfection. And that's okay. So that's the final piece of this. Being okay with who we are. Being okay with being fallible and human. Being okay with making mistakes. Being okay with carrying the vestiges of hatred and anger. As long as we are aware and as long as we are working to be more open, to be more kind, to be more loving, to be more compassionate. Look what just happened. Look at this. I don't want to swear. Okay. Look at this thing where this plane load of people was dumped on Martha's Vineyard. Amazing. Amazing that we're capable of such inhumanity. But of course we are. We're, far greater. Is it tonight that the Ken Burns Holocaust series is airing? Yeah. Speaking of inhumanity, we're capable of tremendous inhumanity. And unfortunately, we've just let that run rampant. We've let it run rampant around the planet. So we've got to come back to where we are, to where we start, to what we have to work with, which is just us, just as we are. And if we pick up that challenge, if we decide to do the work of awakening and transforming, then we're doing enough.
Margaret is not here today, but if she was here, I would ask her to repeat a story that somehow was burned into my mind, partially because she expressed it so well, and I can't express it as well as she did. But she was telling the story of, well, first of all, she grew up in the South. Um, and she was telling a story of being in, I think it was a book club with a number of different people, and they would meet every month, and they had met for years every month, and they were very close, and they shared stories, they shared things going on with them and their family. And one of the people in the book group was a black man, and they were actually meeting at his house on this particular day. And she said at the end of their session, they went to go outside, and there had been some sleet or something icy had formed on the step outside of the doorway. And she said, as she was about to step out to the doorway, her host took her arm to steady her. And she said, my whole body just tensed up because I was taught that a black man does not touch a white woman. And she said, when that happened, I realized that he could feel it too. And she said, I felt so terrible to this wonderful friend of mine. And it was it was just in her body. Uh, and I thought that was such a beautiful story, something that obviously she had thought about, she was aware of, um, and I keep it in my mind a lot because we're, I think, emanating a lot more than we're aware of sometimes.
I think one of the things, and that's sort of points to it in a way. I mean, racism, I think, takes a different form in the North than it does in the South. So that's sort of more classic race, the white supremacist kind of racism, the Klan that's in the South. In the North, we also have racism, but it's more subtle, and it's, more based on cultural things. Like, I don't, disclose it, in my home growing up, that my parents were never racist in a sense. They were, and but they were educators in New York. And when busing started to happen, and kids from impoverished neighborhoods and much more violent and disrupted environments started getting busted into the sort of white middle class schools, that caused a huge fluffle. And it was, clearly racist things were being said, but they were being said in a sort of socio-cultural context rather than in a biological context. So, and in some ways that's even more pernicious. This woman told a great story. One of the first anti-racist groups she worked with was a group of wives of Ku Klux Klansmen who were so disturbed by the hatred that their husbands had, and they didn't want that to be passed on to their kids. They wanted in some way to be able to disrupt this cycle. And she said, but in order to do this, they had to make it appear that it was just a women's sewing circle, that they were getting together to sew, but in fact, they were getting to talk about the racist attitudes.
I think it takes a lot of courage, like Margaret, I think, showed in telling that story to you, Susan, or whomever she tells it to. I think it takes a lot of courage to be vulnerable in that way. And I think a lot of what's going on in the world today is that people don't have the courage to be introspective and to be vulnerable and to accept ownership of what they have been born into or acculturated into. I got to a point where I don't even with my own baggage, it's I don't like it, and I don't and I'm always working on it, but I also don't sort of kick myself in the ass too much for it, because that's not helpful. Because then you just become defensive and build up walls and don't take ownership, and it perpetuates the cycle that we're in and that we see all the time. So I think that's pretty brave of Margaret and folks like her.
Yeah, what you just described, that's exactly the balance that we have to try to strike. We don't go forward by beating ourselves up either. We need to acknowledge what we have to work on, but we got to give ourselves the same credit that we would give to another human being. And then we're not going to shame ourselves and blame ourselves and, engage in self-deprecating thoughts, but simply, what those of you that are into the depth of the koans, you will often see a response by one of the teachers that I am just thus. I am just thus. Just thus includes all the things that we are talking about, right? Just thus. Here we are.
I will share something that happened to me recently. I guess I grew up in Bronxville, sort of a very uh, wealthy, fairly wealthy anyway, suburb of New York City. Everybody there was white. And not only there, but whenever I've been in any area with wealth, it seems like because whites have had control of the money-making machinery forever, and blacks were not long ago, so pushed down that they were literally slaves. I think it takes some time to rise out of a situation like that that's so incredibly oppressive and terrible, and work your way out. That it seems like, you go to like a country club or something, and like the parking attendants are far more likely to be black than white, and these kind of menial job situations. And it seems like, as an artifact of the entire history, that's sort of an objective statistical fact. So, recently we were in what was the place called? Enchantment. It's a place in Sedona, which is a pretty expensive place. And this guy is sort of walking in the parking lot. He walks towards us. It's a black guy. And I was in the state, I was wondering where to park. And I assumed he was a parking attendant. And I can't remember if I said something like, where should I park or something like that. And then I realized he was wandering around because he was trying to find his casita. These rooms are like casitas, they're called, in separate rooms. It's an expensive place, and he was staying there, and he was trying to find his room where his family was. So that was sort of a manifestation of an assumption, that I was making, that was, basically racist. But it's pretty crazy. So it's like, it seems like, and the thing is, statistically, it is sort of true that our society is so fucked up that it is more likely that if you see a black person in this wealthy place where very few people are black who were staying there, actually, this guy was, but very few were. The assumption has truth in it statistically, but it puts this by you have to sort of clear your mind of these things that are artifacts of the past, like the fact that somebody like that is fairly likely to actually be an attendant there, because if you have to work to free yourself of the assumption of that, because it restricts each individual, because any individual is not a statistic, and so this guy is somebody's staying there, and he has to deal with the fact that this white person has this assumption, and that that would, for him, that he didn't seem to notice. He responded in a very good way, that he didn't seem to care or notice, but I think he may have at some level. And, you know, so somehow you have to, there is work in freeing yourself of assumptions when dealing with any individual, because an individual is not controlled by the statistics and the history necessarily. Each individual is different. So anyway, I had that experience recently, which really
Yeah.
struck me.
Thank you, Gary, for sharing that. It goes right to the heart of the matter that we as Buddhist practitioners what are we letting go of? Our attachments and our delusions. And if that's true, we should be greeting every being, human and otherwise, as tabula rasa, right? It's the blank slate. We don't, we're not bringing history, we're not bringing prejudice, we're not bringing fear, we're not bringing whatever, but we fall down in doing that. And that's what we've got to get up and keep trying, keep letting go, so that we can see each being as they are just us, and not through the lens of fears or stereotypes or, just there they are. We don't know, good, bad, and different. There they are. And that's work. That's really work, that's work. We see these things all the time, that you mentioned, how many times we see things where, white people make assumptions that a black man is dangerous, and they cross the street to avoid, that man, when they might be crossing over to the dangerous white guy. It's like, but but those are the kind of implicit things that it's so important that we become aware of, and we let go, Everybody that we meet is the Buddha. And they are. And I think the remarkable thing is that I think if we could see that, that's transformative. And I think that was implied in what this woman was talking about, how she met everybody with dignity and respect, and, and had a dialogue that was based on that, not on shaming and blaming. Dharma is a powerful tool. It's a powerful tool that we're very fortunate to have.
Gary,
So-
go ahead, Deborah. Go.
Okay, so what keeps coming up for me when I hear all this over and over again is the plight of women. So, and of course, God forbid, the Holocaust thing that Peter just mentioned. But so the thing is, what I just realized is, like, my experience as a woman surgeon, I'll just say, was a tremendous amount of bullshit, because there was so much weird, embedded, competitive rage that I didn't know what hit me. It was a very bizarre experience. It all worked out. Grass still grew, but it was very bizarre. And it's pervasive in our society. This is women are supposed to be in a certain role, and we piss people off so pervasively for not. It's just the way it is. But so what I saw a second ago was that if I disappear, if I can, like the black guy in Enchantment, not really worry about what I see reflected in someone else when they see me, and just see that they have this stuff going on, and have compassion for it. And, of course, compassion for, oh shit, this is a pain in the ass for me, or blah, 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 but not get into this kind of seesaw, anger, disruption, frustration of whose vision is right. Because each of us is imposing on the other our own stories and universe and cultural bias and all the other things that we each bring. And you can't win because it's a seesaw. Who's right and who's wrong? We're humans batting each other. But if you disappear, as Peter often says, that, well, if you're not there, you don't have to worry. I mean, he doesn't say it that way, but so that you can just see that you can see the reflection of where they've come from in how they respond and not take it personally and have compassion for that. That's a history. And for yourself, of course, as well. You just what the you know, you got a whole story around how frustrating it is, but it is what it is. It's how you gonna you can't. It's like being, as Gary often says, fighting a hurricane. What are you gonna do? Be pissed off at a hurricane? I mean, it's part of what is. It's there's a reason why a hurricane accumulated. The power of it and the accumulated disruption of it is I'll just say physiologic. So
You know, what that brings to mind for me, you know, among other things, is that I've been thinking quite a bit about Al Franken lately because he has reappeared. I don't know if you've noticed, but Al Franken is back in the public dialogue. And of course, he was erased for a while. And you know, and what he had done was stupid. It was a quintessentially asshole male move. But at least in my mind, I don't think it merited erasure. And when that erasure happened, the possibility of the sort of the teaching moment, the transformational moment was lost. That if as a society, instead we had gone and said, you know, in some compassionate way, helped him to understand why his behavior was inappropriate and, you know, and why he needed to some penance for that, some atonement, some apology. That's very different from kind of like, you know, he doesn't exist anymore. You know, so again, I think, you know, whether it's we're talking about, you know, misogyny or any of these things, I think, you know, the question is, are we creating the opportunity for dialogue and transformation, or are we shutting down those things?
So we all want to show up, and when that happens, there will be potential chaos and friction, but it can be a learning opportunity. And if we don't show up or want the other person to go away, shut them down, it's murder. Not murdering is not easy. The alternative is to figure out how to wave the magic wand and get rid of everybody you think is so, you know, as Clinton used to say, despicables. Deplorables, that's right.
Oh, yeah. Well, that's interesting. You know, you just the way you said that, you know, just hit me. You know, each of us can look at that. If I had the magic wand, what would I do? You know, I could get rid of Donald Trump and, you know, and just wave this thing. Or I could be in a world where they're there and I have to deal with them. What would I choose? What would I choose?
I'm still in the kill 'em mode, but I get it. It's a problem. I mean, I get it.
What's that song? Killing them gently.
But what a difficult job being God is.
Yes.
And it's
Yeah,
never,
and he gets a lot of shit for it too.
yeah.
Or she.
Yeah.
Um, we were in the Lobster Shack in Cape Elizabeth, and sitting there was Al Franken, and we were waiting in line, sort of looking at him at his table, and it gave us a wonderful opportunity to teach our kids who were waiting with us who the hell Al Franken was, and how he got erased, and why he got erased, and then we had an opportunity to teach them about that, and also a little bit about grace, and maybe how he made a mistake, and how what his values were, and how people with good values still make mistakes. And I think our kids are kind of like, well, is he going to be erased forever? And we're sort of like, I don't know. So it's good to hear that he's back. I didn't know that he was back. I knew he was in Maine this summer, but I didn't know he was back in the I guess the public sphere. So that's good.
That's great that came up as an example, and you actually had that encounter and with your kids to teach. That's wonderful. Okay.